What up, guys? Thank you guys for joining us again for another episode of Tech Talkin. I'm your host, Jameson Redding, and we got an awesome show for you guys tonight. Hope everyone's staying safe out there and, just getting through this thing together and staying positive. So what better time while you're stuck at home to get everything rigged up and ready and plan those trips for when you can get back on the water. So we've got an awesome show with Jim Sammons from the Kayak Fishing Show tonight. He's one of my good friends, and we get to spend a lot of time traveling together when we're not stuck at home going through this. So, we've been chatting a little bit before the show started, and we're going to go through some different rigs that he uses, how safety things that he takes when he does go beyond the breakers. That's what this episode is going to be about, by the way, is beyond the breakers. When you want to go offshore and you want to tackle those big swells or whatever to get to fish that, are a little bit bigger than what swim around your local pond. So we're going to go through some of his safety tips. We're going to go through some of his rigging and some of his gear. We're going to have a great time for sure tonight. And let's just, jump right into it. So again, thank you guys for watching. I'm going to switch over and just see the comments. Got a few watching. Gene, of course, is on every night. Thank you for watching again. ASAP Fishing 1, thank you for tuning in. It's good to see you guys. Let's bring Jim up and see what he's got going on. How's it going, Jim?
What's up, brother? Cheers.
Yeah, we're both doing a little social distancing here together. There's James. I knew he would be on here to heckle someone. Let's see. As you can see.
Hi, James.
James loves to just give us a hard time.
How many?
Jean, of course, is here. She says hi. As always, she's like literally Jackson Kayak's biggest fan and probably biggest or best team member for sure. She's just always out there and doing a great job. So thank you for tuning in. Jim, this picture, I mean, this is offshore as it gets. Look at this thing. You are probably one of the most accomplished offshore kayak fishermen in the world, without a doubt. And this right here is just a perfect example. And you've landed a lot of these, and I know you've done several interviews lately about it, but just give us a brief background on, your kayak fishing history.
Well, I think the biggest thing is I've just been doing it a really long time. So yeah, you do it a long time. You're bound to get lucky every once in a while. I caught the first marlin off of a kayak here in La Jolla many, over 20 years ago. And was lucky enough to do it a lot more times when I was guiding down in Baja and then on other trips to Costa Rica and Panama. And so big fish just became my thing. Jameson kind of disappeared off the screen.
I'm still here. I'm playing with this new camera. I'm just going to switch to the old camera. Playing with the new camera, and it broke. So
yeah, I've been lucky enough to do it a lot of times. I've caught a lot of billfish. Been involved not only with my own fish, but with the handling of billfish from clients when we were landing them down in Mexico. So lucky, like I said, just right place, right time, and just doing it a long time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I've learned a lot from you getting to travel and just go through it. I mean, I guess you learn a lot from doing it. So, as we go through this, I'm sure that you could help people kind of skip that step of learning from your mistakes because.
And I've made a lot.
Yeah, well, I think we all have. I mean, I know some of the first, I was undergunned, didn't have the proper gear. Looking back, probably wasn't safe. I've always wore my PFD, but probably didn't have the right radios or the right GPS or any of that, stuff that you really need if you're going to go offshore. I'm going to pull up another picture because this is just awesome. I mean, as we're talking offshore, this is what lives out there. So you've caught how many marlin again from the kayak?
48.
That's not a small number. Dave says, "What's up?" That is a really weird shirt that you have on there, Dave. So,
does it match the wallpaper?
I think that's just more shirts hanging in the background.
But yeah,
maybe with the social distancing, he actually had to make his shirt from the wallpaper, and because he hasn't been able to go shopping.
But yeah, that shot there is with my good buddy Sean, and of course, if you're able to help your friend land a marlin off a kayak, that's even more exciting. And so, just being a part of that, and and I don't care how many times I do it, that moment of when you're reaching down to grab the bill of a marlin or a sailfish. You know, I've never caught an Atlantic sailfish. Those little guys, you know, all the ones we've caught have been big. And they're just every time, and I don't care. It's probably the small ones just as the same. I mean, you're talking about a fish with a 3-foot spear on the end of its face. You know, it's scary and exciting every single time.
So let's talk about that. I mean, it's scary and exciting. Do you ever feel, you know, prepared to hook a big fish like that?
Do I ever feel prepared? Well,
yeah, like you go out and you're like, I am ready. You know, if this happens, I'm good.
Well, I certainly wasn't on the first one. You know, I was fishing with 20-pound mono, no leader, and that fish dragged me for 2.5 hours, 8 miles out to sea. So had no communication equipment, nothing. I mean, it was a big learning experience. Now, when we do go out for those, if we know we're targeting billfish, yeah, there's definitely preparations. And whenever I'm going out offshore, there's gear preparations, there's mental preparations, you know, a lot of things to take into consideration.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll get into that real quick. I'm going to hit on a couple of questions here. So what's a great starter? Jackson Kayak from ASAP Fishing there. I would say the bite is probably, I don't know if you've got to spend a lot of time in it, Jim, but the bite is a great price point, stable, easily rigged as you grow with the sport and decide what you need as far as features go. So check out the bite from Jackson there. Gene says 48. Wow. On the Marlin. I think Dave says he's trying to be like the Tiger King. There can only be one Tiger King. We all know that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Camille says, do you recommend any newbie to try offshore? I'm going to say for me, and you answer this too. But for me, I think that at some point you're going to be a newbie to offshore, but it's a good idea to have some, you know, things in place to know a few paddle strokes that'll help you and your boat and things like that. So I wouldn't just go from the kayak shop straight to the breakers and just try to go through them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I used to, when I was guiding a lot more here, I used to take every single client I had to La Jolla, and it was go out there for big fish, going out there for yellowtail, white sea bass, and occasionally threshers. And, you know, I used to do that. And then as I was guiding more and more, I'm like, I'm having people lose gear. I'm having people fall off the kayaks. I'm having crashing in the surf because their first experience is going out after big fish. So I kind of changed that to making all of I kind of had a prerequisite. You had to go to a bay bass fishing trip, where it's a more controlled environment. You got the repetition of dealing with a lot of fish, moving around the kayak, dealing with the gear, getting really comfortable with that before you jump to that next level of pulling on a big fish that can potentially hurt you or pull you in the water, or if you make a mistake.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. I took a client to Mexico. He just saw a video I had done and he's like, I want to go do that. And he joined me on a trip to Mexico. He had never kayak fished. 15 minutes into the very first day that he had ever kayak fished, he hooked a striped marlin. His very first fish ever landed off of a kayak.
Meanwhile,
striped marlin.
Meanwhile, I go to Panama and everyone around me is catching roosters, and it takes me 6-7 days to finally land one. And, you know, it was a big one, but it wasn't as big as everyone else's. Let's just be honest.
Well, luck is a good thing, and I've been very lucky.
Well, it is awesome, and I know you caught your first one there in your home waters out of La Jolla. I want to get into, as we get into this technical aspect, I do want to get into some of the safety things, because I know you and I are both an advocate for the PFD, but there's so many other things that go along with safety, especially in big water. And I'll let you dive into that. But real quick, I just want to hit a couple of comments. We got, let's see here. We got Victor from Spain. I hope you're doing well, Victor, over there. I know it's hitting you guys pretty hard. So thanks for joining us, and hope you guys are staying positive and safe. Vince here says, hi there. You just have the knack of making offshore stuff look easy. Is that you, or is it your cameraman? That's a good question for that. I would like to ask.
Well, let's put it this way. I was doing this a long time before my kayak or my cameraman was. So
Yeah, but did you look good when you were doing it before?
Oh no, I was total spaz. Until Will came along and taught me how to dress properly.
Right. How to hold your paddle right side up.
Makeup and all that. You know, I look terrible, but.
So he also says your number one go-to Jackson kayak. Well, I think I know the answer to that. It's going to be the Kraken, right?
Well, yeah, for offshore, I mean, Jackson still doesn't have a boat that compares. You know, I like paddling.
Right.
And that's what it was designed for. So we're designed for offshore paddling or distance paddling. And I just prefer it. I prefer paddling. But what is the number one? The best one is the one that you're comfortable in. And that's the thing is finding the boat that you like that you feel comfortable in, as long as it is designed to, you know, to handle that environment.
Yeah, definitely when it comes to paddling, there's no doubt that the Kraken is our number one boat. And I will say, if you're looking for a pedal kayak, that I've spent a lot of time in the Kusa FD, and it does a really great job of handling
the FD.
Yeah, for the pedal drive side of our boats, it handles the swell, you know, really, really well. I know down in Panama, we were in some pretty nasty stuff where other brands, and I'm not going to mention their names, didn't stay upright when the Kusa did. And I was in the high seat position, which is actually quite a bit higher than most high seat positions that we have. So if you're looking for pedals, Kusa FD, paddle, obviously the Kraken. Let's see here. Gary says, what's up? What's up, man? I hope you're staying safe. He's another fellow North Carolinian. He says also, so true. People need to experience a trip first. Yeah, you definitely, or, you know, also if you're going to go offshore, find someone like Jim here, or someone that is experienced. It's worth paying. There's a lot of good guides out there that you can pay.
Exactly.
You'll learn so much in a day. It's worth your money. How important is buddy fishing in big open water? I think it's like so important that I'm not sure I would go out without a buddy on big water unless, you know, it's super calm. I know the water and I have a float plan and people know exactly where I'm going to be. Maybe I would. But I mean, that's just my opinion. I know you've got one.
No, well. I definitely agree. I'm not going to lie. I've done a lot of offshore fishing by myself. I used to just say, hey, I'm going out and I'm going to charge and I'm going to go 8 miles offshore. But I was younger, a little more bulletproof and, you know, a little more stupid. I must say, I still enjoy the solitude, but you don't have to be that far away from somebody to still have your solitude. I enjoy being on the water with somebody else so much more, just to, you know, to BS with all day and to give a hard time and to compete with.
Yeah. And you never know when you're going to need, like, you know, obviously that picture with the marlin, you don't know when you're going to need someone to assist you or if something does go wrong, because I think things out there can go wrong a lot quicker than they might on a lake. I mean, things can go really terribly wrong on a lake. We've seen that happen in the KBF events and things like that, you know, when people
and the consequences of things going wrong are much bigger when you're 6 miles offshore.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
and it's a lot further.
It could be a small problem. It could be a hook in your hand.
But that could turn into a big problem, though.
That's a big problem if you don't have to just make a few strokes to get to the bank versus I'm 6 miles offshore. I could really use somebody's help. And I've literally seen guys get both of their hands pinned together by hooks.
No, that's
now, if you don't have somebody else to help you, you could be in bad shape. So
yeah,
having somebody with you is always a good idea. And like I said, to me, it's just more fun.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely is. So Josh says, what's going on? You know, ASAP Fishing does say if it's their first time kayak fishing, again, I think that Bite is a great all-around, all-purpose boat. If it's your first time kayak fishing, even if it's not offshore, it's still a good idea to go with somebody that might have some experience, or at least somewhere that you know really well. Josh says, I want to get both of you out here for a JK Northern snakehead trip. I think it'd be a lot of fun. I've actually never caught a snakehead. I think it would be a lot of fun.
I thought I had caught snakehead, and it turned out I hadn't.
You probably caught bowfin down there. Yeah, so I've done the same. I would love to. Don says, hey, man, Don, I miss hanging out with you at the Boondoggles. He says, hey, Jim. Hey, Jameson. Good to see you both. I hope you're doing well up north there. I'm just going through some of these before we dive into the technical stuff. So for those of you that haven't seen the show before, you're just joining, it's kind of in the name, Tech Talking. We're going to talk tackle, tips, technique. The whole idea behind this is to dive into a little bit more of the technical aspects of kayak fishing, from the rigging all the way to, you know, what not is best for different things. So if you have any questions, technical questions like that, please post them in the comments. Also post where you're watching from. That's always fun to see, you know, where everybody's from. And also, please like and share this either from YouTube or from Facebook as we go through this. So David says that he is living vicariously through watching fishing videos. It'll be nice when the lockdown is done. Thanks for the tips. For sure. I was telling Jim earlier, I do have a couple of private areas that I've been able to sneak to, kind of drive straight to the water with the secret gate key and all that good stuff. So that's what's keeping me through this. But I know it's going to be tough for a lot of people, but it's worth trying to stay, because you can spread it to other people. So it's definitely worth just adhering to what's best for right now, for sure. No matter what water, people need to practice getting back in your kayak. That's a great thing. I always recommend you get in your kayak, go flip it on purpose when it's nice outside and you have the right safety gear. See what it takes to get back into it.
Yeah, for sure. And I always tell the stories. I actually had a client come out with me here in La Jolla who came to me as an experienced kayak angler. So I'm like, okay, we don't need to do the bay bass fishing trip first. And we get out to La Jolla out in the kelp beds, and he flips the kayak with hatches open. Ugh. And doesn't know how to get back in the kayak. It's like, no. You cannot tell me you're an experienced kayak fisherman and not know how to do a self-rescue. If you can't get into your kayak in water deeper than knee-deep water, don't go out. Get out there, practice it. It's one of the number one skills you have to know.
Well, it's one of the things you hope you never need to do, but if when the time comes, you got to be able to get back in. ASAP's got a lot of great questions here. So he says, what's the main thing you want a client to get out of a trip? And for me, when I've done a few trips, and I'm not guided nowhere near as much as you, but it is that education aspect of helping them, everything from catching the type of fish we're fishing for in the baits, but all the way down to how to learn some techniques in the kayak itself. So
yeah, if at the end of the day, whether a person has caught a fish or not, I can guarantee if somebody comes out with me, they will have learned something. Right. They will have something to increase their chances of getting fish, or at least increase their chances of being safe or being successful on their next trips, because that's what it's all about. I want people to learn. If they learn and we've had fun and we've shared stories all day, that for me is a good day. The fish are a bonus. Like I said, if I go out and take somebody out big game fishing, well, your chances of getting a big, as you go for apex predators, your chance of actually getting one goes down. So, Jesus.
You all right over there? You just had the one beer, right?
Well, the thing is, I've got 5 dogs. And
last week it was cats. This week it's dogs.
This one just ran in under my desk, and he is the youngest. That's Boomer.
What's up, Boomer?
He and the 15-year-old dog puppy just walked in here at the same time, and they pushed my door open and they begged to be in here. So anyway, I think I have it under control. Sorry about that.
No worries. See if I can switch back to this other camera. It's going to work. I don't know why that stopped working earlier. We'll try it. If it stops working, I know what to do. So we're doing a little testing here. We're going to get into the technical stuff, but I do want to answer this one last question before we jump in. It is from Gene. So this is for both of us. What's your favorite offshore fish to catch? Jim, you go first.
Offshore. Well, it would have to be striped marlin. There's just nothing like it. There's a lot of fish in there that I could throw, like tarpon. I love those, but I wouldn't say that's offshore. So, but yeah, striped marlin, there is absolutely nothing like it. And then after that, oh my gosh. Again, offshore, our rooster's more inshore, offshore yellowfin tuna.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's probably going to be my answer as well. You shared that video of us in Louisiana and kind of me catching my first from the kayak. And so, yeah, yellowfin tuna is definitely now I've caught marlin and I've caught striped marlin, but not from a kayak, from a panga, a small panga. But yeah, I think I have to agree with you on the yellowfin for sure, because that was just straight up brutal.
As I always say, I love to catch fish that physically hurt you. That make your arms hurt, that make your back hurt, that tax you. That is just so fun.
So Charles, and I don't know the answer. Like I haven't caught one of these, and like you said, they're more inshore. But tarpon, he says, big tarpon are showing up near him, and I wanted to pull this picture up just because of what he said here. That is a fish I would like to compare to other. Like I've never had the opportunity to catch a big tarpon. I've hooked and lost big tarpon, but definitely would like to do that. And that is a stud right there.
That was a big fish. That was 6 days of fishing, and that was the first fish. So that was a really, really tough trip. That's why we were just so excited about that one. Tarpon and billfish. The thing is, a tarpon can hit you and hurt you and all that. But again, that billfish has that 3-foot spear on the end of its face, so considerably more dangerous. But I've always said, if we had tarpon here in San Diego, I would fish for them every day.
Yeah, that would be.
They're so fun to catch.
Yeah, I really want to get a big one. I haven't. So let's dive into the technical stuff. So like I said, I think one of the first things that I always like to talk about, and I know you do as well, is the safety equipment. So let's say you're going offshore for the very first time. What are some of the top safety things that should be considered? And let's talk about them. I'm going to bring this picture up that you sent me as well.
Well, I always say, because I do a lot of seminars and stuff, and I'll throw this question out to a group. It's like, what's the number one piece of safety equipment, or the number one safety thing you should bring with you on your kayak when you're going offshore? And the answer to that, quite honestly, is common sense. Bring some common sense with you. Know if it's the right day to go out. Know what the prevailing winds are. Know what the conditions are, what the expected conditions are. Know your own limitations. It's easy to paddle 5 miles offshore. It can be horrible paddling 5 miles back if you're having to do that into a headwind with chop when you're already exhausted. So again, common sense, know your limitations. That's really the most important thing.
Right.
If you're talking about getting into the gear of it all, having a kayak that's made for, that you're comfortable with, that can handle being out there. Having that PFD, I beat that drum constantly, is right. Wear a PFD, wear one that's made for paddling, find one that you are comfortable in, wear it tight. It feels weird when you first put them on, but then wear it tight, it moves with you, and then right. It's more part of you. Mm-hmm. I got a VHF radio. You can see it in that picture. I got a VHF radio the day after I caught that first marlin. It dragged me 8 miles offshore, and we had no way to communicate with anybody. And we're like, this is insane. There are boats going by. My buddy actually set off a flare to see if they would come by and help us with this fish. And boats just kept going by. So a good waterproof floating VHF radio. And then the other thing you can see on my PFD there is a PLB. That's kind of a newer thing over the last couple of years that I've added to the equipment that I carry. And I've got one actually right here. It's small. You can see it's very small on that PFD. It's the size of an old style cell phone, really. And, I just keep that on my PFD. That thing can get you saved. If you don't have cell service where you're trying to call anybody, this thing will send people to exactly where you are. So
explain how that works a little bit. Do you have to actually push a button to let people know, or is it a trackable thing where it has an ID and like your wife says, hey, you didn't show up, here's the ID?
No, you do have to activate it, because you certainly don't want to get in trouble for setting this thing off. It's
an SOS type thing. You hit the button and
it works via the satellites. Mm-hmm. So it's not using a cell service. It goes to the satellites, and it sends out your distress and it sends out your GPS numbers. The only thing is you have to make sure that it remains above water. That's why I have it up, high on my PFD. All you have to do to activate it is deploy the antenna and then hit the button, which I will not do because
you'll have helicopters showing up at your
house. You can get fined for that. So, like I said, it's kind of a one-time use thing. Right. And they actually, I think, as I recall, they have some kind of a deal. If you actually have to get rescued while using this thing, they will replace it.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of those things. I'm sure that's the last thing you're worried about. at the time. And I think this recently happened. I think you might have shared it too, but this year or maybe late last year, someone in New Zealand actually got separated from their kayak, I believe, and one of those saved his life.
Yeah, if you go to the ACR website, they've got lists of survival stories. So it's pretty interesting. And the cool thing is it's not only just for if you're offshore, if you're a backcountry hiker, hunter, anything like that, that signal is still going to go to the satellite, and they are still going to send you help.
Right. So, now, I've been carrying the little Garmin one that I think kind of does the same thing, but it also lets me send the messages. And you have the SOS that you can hit. It's waterproof and whatnot. It doesn't, I don't think it has all the features that has from a water perspective, but like if I got injured out on the trail or, backcountry hiking or hunting, you can hit the button and someone can come. And it just gives you that peace of mind to know, like, I don't want to use this, but if I need to or have to.
Well, and some of those are subscription based.
And it is. The Garmin one is subscription
based. This is not subscription based. It's
okay, nice.
You buy it, and it's your last line of defense. It's your last thing you're going to use. You're going to try your cell phone. You're going to try your VHF. And if nothing else is working, then you use your PLD.
Right. But it's one of those things, again, you don't want to have to use it, but like I said, that story right there spoke to me because not only was he in the water, but separated from his kayak. And it was like, I think it was like 2 miles he was separated, or maybe more. So Camille's asking about the Spot. Does it have the same features? I think it does, but it may be the subscription that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's that same thing. Spot, you can send messages, yada, 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 but you do have to have a subscription to it. So you're paying all the time. Where this, you buy it that one time, you keep it on you. It's got, I want to say it's like a 5-year shelf life on the battery. And then it'll run for like 20 hours once you turn it on.
That's awesome.
The one I have there actually has a screen on it. So you can see that it's broadcasting. You can see the GPS numbers that it's sending out, which isn't as important. But if you had a VHF radio and you had that, you could conceivably say what the numbers were, but
right. And that's the other thing. It's not just the VHF for communicating with other kayakers, but again, you also can communicate with Coast Guard and rescue people and even check the weather and whatnot. Right. Cameron, what's up? He says he's Mark Krau's apprentice. Mark Krau's builds a lot of my custom rods that I fish with, especially like the ones I caught the big tuna with that you just posted the video. There I actually mentioned that's one of Mark's rods. He tried to take credit for those catches, but so we'll dive into that a little bit. Speaking of rods, moving on from safety. Actually, before we get into rods, I'd like to get into a little bit of your kayak setup. Like, what are some things that you're gonna need to have rigged? I know you do a lot of traveling, so it also probably makes it a little more difficult. But I've done it with you, and I've watched you bring those things with you that you just like, I can't go offshore without these couple of things. What would those things be, and how do you rig them?
Well, I love having the Raymarine fish finder on my kayak, and thanks to Yak Attack, they've made it so they are so easy to rig up your boat and keep it portable. So I can show up to a location, jump on one of their kayaks, and rig it up. I've got actually my Raymarine Element right here. And, it's got the Yak Attack base and the lock and load system. So super easy to rig. And then there's a lot of different ways you can rig up your transducer. Now these have GPS, and that was one thing I wanted to mention. And, not only for fishing, but for safety wise too. I mean, if you don't have a GPS, you got to at least have a compass out there with you. I actually ran into a guy out in the fog, and he had no clue where he was. And he asked me which direction the beach was. He goes, "Is the beach that way?" And I'm like, yeah, if I don't know what beach, it might be Hawaii. It's certainly not the beach here. So, just having some of that basic safety stuff, even if, like I said, if you don't have the GPS, have a compass. I carry both. And I'm such into safety so much, but guys, please understand that when you're in a kayak, you're invisible.
Yeah, that's for sure.
You are invisible when it comes to boats. And I came to the realization of this really more so once we got a boat. And I was out cruising around La Jolla, and it was kind of overcast, foggy-ish day. And here comes guys paddling out of the fog. And man, they were invisible. You throw in a little bit of swell, and a kayak's only sitting like this much above the water. I mean, you drop into a trough of a swell, you are invisible. So having those Yak Attack VisiCarbon lights or a flag or anything, make yourself visible and wear that PFD.
And okay. Don actually brought up another cool item is the rescue knife. That's a great, great thing to have, especially when you're dealing with heavier line and stuff like that with these bigger fish, and you get something close to your boat and you get line tangled. I know sometimes you're not going to break 60, 70 pound braid with your hands, so you need that. Be able to quickly do
it. And I've got one sitting in here somewhere, a hook knife is really nice, because believe me, if you're trying to cut line with a knife and you're trying to hit it this way, or you're trying to cut it with clippers, and in its emergency situation, a hook knife is so nice because you just reach across the line and pull, and it'll just pop. Well, actually, I do have just a straight up hook knife. Just happens to be.
You just have them laying around in your office.
Yeah. So here's one right here. And I don't like this one, actually. That's why it's in my office. I have one that's plastic and then has a different blade, because this one just starts rusting up on me. But having the plastic one with the replaceable blade, just something, like I said, and I keep that in the pocket of my PFD, and just I can reach out and cut that line. So that's a great piece of safety gear right there, particularly when you're dealing with really big fish.
This is kind of stepping back to safety equipment. I want to talk about the PFD thing, and you have it in the pocket. And that's one of the things, sometimes if I'm bass fishing or I'm inshore fishing the flats, I'll wear the inflatable style PFDs. But anytime that I'm river fishing, where I definitely know that there's a chance that I might not be able to pull that rip cord, or even offshore, I like having a standard type 3 PFD that has pockets, because if you do get separated from your boat, you just said, you're going to have that knife there. You've got your VHF radio attached to it. You've got your PLD, personal
locator beacon.
Beacon. Okay. B as in boy. But you have those things attached on your person, versus if you are wearing that inflatable style, a lot of times there's nowhere to store anything. So you got it laid on your kayak. You get separated from the boat. None of that stuff's going to do you a bit of good, because it's no longer with you. So that's just another thing I'd like to touch on there before we move on.
I agree. I'm very much into the PFDs that have inherent flotation. So if something does go wrong, you're going to float. You don't have to worry about pulling a tab or it auto inflating or whatever else the case may be.
Right. So we've talked about having a few things there on your boat, like the knife and your Ray Marine, but also you usually carry a bait tank. And so, we've all done this different ways. What have you found to be kind of your best and simplest, easiest way to set up a do-it-yourself bait tank, if you would?
Well, it's a matter of just, you can do it with a bucket. It depends on the bait you're going to be carrying, but definitely for salt water, you want a full circulating live bait tank. You don't want a bubbler. Like if you were to throw mackerel into a bait tank with a bubbler, it'll kill them. The bait tank gets filled with slimy bubbles and they die. So you definitely want a full circulating live bait tank. And I've got some videos up on our Facebook page and our YouTube page on how to build one. But it is a small bilge pump. You can do it as simple, like at the Kraken, we made it so you could build it into the boat. Mm-hmm. But before we were doing that, you just drag that pump along the side of the kayak, and water's flowing in and water's flowing out. That thing's running constantly. Yeah. But, as much as I would much rather catch a fish on a lure, on a popper, on top water, on an iron. Vertical. I'd much rather catch it that way. But sometimes, particularly when you start looking at billfish and stuff.
I'm going to do whatever it takes.
The best way is to have a big old fat live mackerel out there, or bonita, or whatever is available, ladyfish, a mullet, and having the ability to carry live bait can mean the difference of whether you're going to get that big fish. So,
we saw it together when we were in Panama. Even the type of live bait, made a huge difference. Like we couldn't find the bait that the roosters really wanted. We had the bigger bonita and they would hit them, but they couldn't really get them turned around. And so it was very frustrating. but it is weird because thinking of it from a perspective of red fishing and bass fishing and stuff that I do, I would never want to throw, like, I'd never throw live bait. I don't have a problem with other people doing it. Don't get me wrong. Now, if it was you, I would, I would definitely give you a hard time, but that's not, it's not really like, I don't have a problem with it. Me personally, I like to challenge myself, and I've actually started trying to, catch reds on fly a little bit now and try to just challenge myself to take that next step. But when it comes to the rare opportunities that I get to go offshore and actually around, these fish like you're talking about, like, I'm going to do whatever I got to do to,
well, like I said, I mean, we've hooked sailfish on iron. I mean, really random stuff. But those billfish, man, they'll follow that live bait for a long time. And you're not going so fast in a kayak that you're going to attract them with a popper, a chugger or anything like that. So just having that live bait out behind you just increases your chances, because like I said, if you're throwing a popper and there's nothing like it. Having a tuna come up off a popper, there's nothing like it. But you have a billfish pick up your bait, that's pretty exciting too. That thing starts running, you turn around, you see that billfish slashing at your bait. It's pretty exciting. And
well, a lot of smaller fish, your bass and your reds, a lot of times you're spending a lot of time to get them to eat, and then you fight them for a little bit and it's over. But with these fish, it's just getting, like, it's not even started when they eat.
Just begun.
It's just begun. Like, getting them to bite is kind of like, that's it. I got them to eat. Now I'm going to land them and do it again. And that's what's like fun about, especially like sight fishing reds or bass fishing, is tricking them into biting. With billfish, like, it's just like, okay, well, that took 30 minutes to get one to eat, and now I've got 2 hours on my hands.
Yeah, the shortest fight we've ever had was an hour. The longest fight we ever had was 5.5 hours on a blue marlin, covered 17 miles, getting dragged for 17 miles. So yeah, that hookup is kind of the
yeah, that's just
part of it.
Yeah. That part's like being in the right place at the right time, obviously having the right bait. But like, once that happens, you're like, all right, well, now we got to settle in, because this is between us. So, talking a little bit about baits there. So bait tank and electronics are kind of really important for you there, rigging up the boat. And I know you've got it kind of modular. You've got the Yak Attack stuff to be able to mount to the tracks. Getting into the bait tank, one of the things I did when I was first starting out, I actually bought a pet food container and just set that thing up, drilled some holes, ran some tubes, ran the bait tank over the side. You can actually take a 12-volt bait tank and run it off 6 volts to slow it down a little bit, I realized. And then it was something I think I got actually from out your way, from Kayak Fishing Supplies, which I'm sure you could get them at like West Marine or wherever, but it was a timer that you could set up to where it would kind of turn that pump on, and you could set the intervals, so you could kind of cut the amount of run time in half, thus doubling your battery life.
The trying to find one of those that actually holds up and works well is tough. Actually, what's funny is, I use the Naqua batteries, and they actually have a on-off switch. So for a portable type switch setup, they have an on-off waterproof switch. That on-off switch actually has, because it was made for their lights,
right? It
has an SOS flashing pattern to it.
Yep, I've done the exact same thing.
So you can run your bait tank on the SOS pattern. So it's
it's just like
so you get a lot more run time.
I'm gonna give up on this other camera. I think it's just cutting off like after a certain amount of time. I like the picture.
It times out.
I think it does. It's my DSLR. So I'm playing with that. Thank you guys for letting me play with the camera equipment during this cast. You're like, what's going on with this screen? It just keeps blacking out. I'm actually
honestly, to make a really super simple one, you get that on-off switch, which goes right into your battery.
Right.
You wire that battery and the switch to a small bilge pump. If you can get a 360 gallon per hour one, that's great. A couple pieces of tubing and then some holes in it so it just overflows. And again, you can do it with a bucket. One of the pieces that I would highly recommend you get is an adjustable spray head. So you attach that hose to the adjustable spray head, because then you can angle it and it'll spray down into the bucket, and you can kind of disperse or lower the amount of pressure or whatever on the amount of water that's going through it.
I'm gonna pull my curtain. So Richard says that you can also use an LED controller for that pump setup as well, and it works great at 25% or 50%. Richard, if you know where to get one of those, put it in the comments, please, so that people can see that. I would just be Googling it, and I'm sure you can do that as well. Just Google that, and I'm sure you can find where to pick one of those up at. But there's all kinds of ways to, as we would say around here, skin a cat. I've never actually seen anyone skin a cat, so I don't know where that saying comes from.
I think you can get that at that Wuhan market.
Yeah, I'm not going. I don't think any of us need to go. I'm social distancing myself from that place forever. Like,
yeah.
That's funny. So let's get into. I kind of mentioned this to you earlier as well. I think no matter maybe line class and size of rods and that kind of thing come into play, but when we're traveling and you've done this a whole lot more than I have, but it seems like you can pretty much take a simple setup with about 4 or 5 different rods to, let's say, jig something on the bottom. Well, I know you got 10, but I'm just saying, if you really think about it, you're going to be jigging for stuff offshore. You're going to be trolling for stuff offshore, and you're going to be casting for stuff offshore. And then a couple of combinations there: trolling live bait versus trolling, lures, jigging or bottom fishing versus live bait versus jigging a lure. So I mean, you can really kind of
you've got like 4 there, and then maybe bring a lightweight setup. In case the big fish aren't going, you have something to throw. And then you can also use that setup as your bait catching rod. So you bring some sabikis along and for catching that live bait. And that's usually best done with like a small bait caster anyway. Or a small spinner. And then that's a fun rod to use if the big stuff isn't going, or if the big stuff is going and you've got so many and you want to catch it on the light gear. Yeah. And I've always said that catching big fish on light gear is something that is very, very, very doable in a kayak. I can definitely see line class records being easily taken in a kayak because, we always talk about it is like the kayak itself is drag and you're never putting as much pressure on the fish as you think you are.
Yeah, because even a small 2-pound bass is going to move the kayak. I mean, it's going to pull the kayak. So, I mean,
for sure,
you end up running into situations where you almost need like a buddy to come over and hold on to your boat to help put more pressure on a fish, because
we do that with marlin all the time.
Yeah. And I know when we were in Louisiana, on the boat, we had much heavier gear and you actually broke a rod that you would have had no trouble landing one of those tuna with from the kayak. Because, you're in this bigger boat and it doesn't move. It's not going with it. Yeah. You saw Don's comment there.
Ballast point. Marlin quarter there, Don.
Yeah. Don, I miss hanging out with you, man. Don's one of my boondoggle buddies for sure. He's always, got a camper, a little teardrop camper kind of thing that he travels with. So hopefully when this is all over, we can have a big giant, boondoggle or something.
It's neat.
So you got those setups. Do you want to walk us through some of your line, reel?
Sure. If anybody's ever seen, if you look at again on our sites, I love, or if you watch the show, I love hollow core braid.
Explain what that is a little bit, because I've never seen it until I met you. So
Seaguar thread lock. There's other types, but that's what I use. Is Seaguar thread lock is a hollow core braid. So basically, it's braid with a hole in it, and you can run your fluorocarbon up inside of it, and then because it's got a hole in it, you can whip loops into it. And these are all knotless things. I put a loop in the end of my line with no knot. And then you serve the end, the joint, if you will. I was going to strip line off here and show you, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, we don't need you to do any stripping.
Anyway, you end up with a completely knotless connection. So when it's going through your guides, you don't have that ding, 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 and there's some great knots out there that are pretty clean now, but there is nothing cleaner than this loop-to-loop connection, knotless connection that you do with hollow core. So for all of my heavier stuff, where I'm going to be vertical jigging, or I'm throwing offshore, or I'm trolling live baits, I'm using Seaguar thread lock, hollow core braid, and then based on the fish, you change up your your leader strength. Now, the reason I go to bigger diameter fluorocarbon isn't because I necessarily need the pulling strength. It's whether the fish has teeth or is very abrasive.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like I said, you can catch really big fish on really small gear. Now, this is a Siegler SGN, so that's the small game narrow.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see, I mean, that's a tiny little reel. I can cover the whole thing up with my hand. I've caught tuna over 100 pounds with this. I've got halibut. I got 140-pound halibut with this little reel.
That's massive.
So super good quality, super smooth drags, very powerful reel. But the reality is, and I've said it sometimes, you are never putting as much pressure on the fish as you think you are. I mean, I learned that the hard way when we were in New Zealand and we were vertical jigging for a big yellowtail, and I was maxing out the drags on some of my, or I thought I was, on some of my reels and fishing 80-pound test and just getting smoked by fish. And I would just, you know, they'd run into the rock. So you just tighten the drag, tighten the drag, tighten the drag until we were finally just full drag. And I always say, if you want to see how hard you can pull, I got a 67-pound thresher shark on 6-pound test on my kayak. If you want to, if you had the ability to do this, if you were to tie your line off across the lake and you had 6-pound test, now sure, if you yank on it, you could snap it, but you pull on it naturally. You know, nice slow pulls, wind pull.
Yeah, you're gonna pull the kayak all the way.
The kayak is eventually just going to start moving. You're going to pull yourself across the lake, and you really want to see how hard you can pull. Snag 20-pound mono on the bottom.
You can't. It's hard to break it.
Try to break it. Particularly try to break it with a bend in the rod. I'm not talking about point it at it and do that. Even that's really tough because it stretches so much. But see how hard you can really pull on that thing, and then you can say to yourself, hey, you know, maybe I don't need such big gear. I mean, like I said, we've caught a lot of marlin. Now, if anybody remembers the old Trinidad 12, it was this small, maybe with less line capacity. And we've landed several marlin on reels this big. Yeah. I've never had a billfish, even big billfish, get halfway into the spool and on relatively small. This is the LGN.
What's the drag on those reels, by the way? It's like, what, 40 pounds, 30, 40 pounds?
Yeah, 35, 40. Yeah. On the LGN, this will make 40, 45.
Okay.
So believe me, nobody wants to pull on 45 pounds of drag. Right. Nobody. So the cool thing is you can fish heavier tackle, you can fish smaller tackle, you can fish lighter tackle in a kayak. You can do all of that if you want, but you don't need, I mean, I do see guys going for big fish and they're using massive gear. And in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, it's not really needed because you're never putting that much pressure on it. All you're doing is wearing yourself out with this giant reel.
Right.
You know, I'd rather pull on this nice small reel it's a good quality reel, has incredible drags on it. Right. But, you know, you don't need to wear yourself out with big, heavy gear as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it definitely makes a difference. And this trickles all the way down to bass fishing because I know a lot of people, you know, throwing certain baits want to throw monofilament because of the stretch. I put braid on everything. And my theory is the kayak is your stretch, right? You know, you set the hook on a good bass, the kayak's going to move. I want to get into a couple of questions here. Gary, and I think Camille may have answered this. She posted a link, holocore splicing, but he is asking about that to explain that connection. We may not have time in this video, Gary, but I know you have some videos, Jim. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually broke it up into the 3 steps. Okay. And we've got those up on the Kayak Fishing Show Facebook page as well as YouTube, okay. Kayak Fishing Tales. And we show you how to whip a loop, show you how to run the line, show you how to serve the connection. So
that's one of the things. I don't think you're going to be doing that while you're on the water that efficiently. So it's one of those things you're probably prepping these.
No, I sit around watching TV making leaders.
Right.
And so then all you have to do on the water is the loop to loop connection, and that's easy.
Yeah, that's really easy. Let's say though you run out. What knot, and we were kind of mentioning, we were talking about this a little bit before the show, but what knot are you going to go to as you're like, I've got to do something?
Historically, I would go uni to uni. I always went uni to uni. During our little quarantine here, I've been experimenting with knots. The cleanest knot, I was on a trip and somebody tied these, was the Sabile knot, or the I can't remember the other name of it. It's got a couple names, but as far as a clean knot through the guides, there's nothing like it, but it's not easy to tie on the water. So I started tying and practicing. My buddy Sean goes, you got to try the RP knot, which is the Royal Polaris knot. You said it was a modified Albright.
That's what I've called it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. But all I know is I've practiced it. I tied it one time. And for me, normally, if I'm trying to tie a knot, it's like, practice, you kind of get it. This one, I watched somebody tie it, and I tied it. And I tied it correctly the very first time. And it is so fast and easy. So if you look that up on YouTube, it's the RP knot. It is so clean through the guides. It's tiny. It's much smaller than the uni to uni.
So I was looking at I've got this, and the way I've learned a lot of my knots, actually, I've got this app, and I'm going to try to show it. I don't think it's going to show up. Anyway, kind of
blind it out.
Yeah, it's called it's Animated Fishing Knots is the name of the app for anybody.
Oh, right. I've seen that.
Or Fishing Knots is what it says, but when I open it, it says Animated Fishing Knots version 1.7. But what's really cool about it is when you're going down through there, and there's tons of these out there, by the way. It's not just this app. It's just the one that I found that works. It has illustrated ways to tie knots, and you can literally look at it by category of tying two lines together, and then it tells you, like, this one's good for, line of the same materials, but this one's good for tying braid to, fluorocarbon. And that's where I learned that knot. And the Albright, I think you just kind of wrap down and go through, where the one we're talking about now, you'd wrap down 8 to however many times and then back up before you go through. So, but that app is great because I've learned a lot of good knots, but I think you hit on it. Finding one you can tie confidently, and especially when you're sitting in the kayak, is
right. I tried that Sabile knot, man. My hands were cramping, and you're having to keep tension on the line and all that. Right. And my buddy's like, try the RP knot, and I'm like, okay, and it's like done. And it was such an easy knot, and I need easy. Believe me, I got a little bit of arthritis in my fingers, and that thing was just so easy to tie. And like I said, it was very small diameter. I haven't had a chance to test it, but my buddy Sean, who uses it all the time, and if they're using it on the Royal Polaris, which is a big, long-range, big game fishing boat, if that's what they use, I'm pretty confident that's going to work.
I'm pretty sure this is the same knot that we were using, or that I used in the Mexican Gulf. Actually recommended to use it as well when we were catching those tuna down in Louisiana. Those are big fish. You landed one over 100, and I did as well from the boat. My biggest from the kayak was like 70, but definitely those knots held up. Now, for me, I am not confident. No pun intended. Not confident in my knot. I'm not confident in that knot with smaller line-to-line connections. Like if I'm doing 15-pound braid and say 15 to 20-pound fluorocarbon leader, I have had that knot slip. Now, I believe wholeheartedly it's because I'm not that good at tying it, but I've never had a problem with bigger line connections, heavier line connections, 50-pound braid and that 80-pound or whatever fluorocarbon. So I just stick with the uni on anything smaller, and I do that one on.
Well, like I said, I tied the two side by side, and I compared them. I actually had them sitting in here. You probably wouldn't show up on here anyway, but hugely noticeable difference in the size of the two knots. Yeah, that RP knot was just so much smaller and so much cooler. So I know we were going to talk about a lot of stuff, and it's actually getting down.
We went fast.
It's absolutely flown by. But it's like I said, we talked about kind of what reels to bring, and bring that reel for throwing poppers. A lot of people say spinning reels are better for poppers. I hate spinning gear, so I personally would rather have a big low pro with a level wind than a spinning reel. I don't like rods that are super long unless I'm just like bass fishing and you're just looking for pure distance. I was actually going to show this, and if you want to bring that video up, Jameson, I can't talk.
James has arthritis back in small hands apparently because he just posted that.
He's talking about himself.
Here we go.
So yeah, this is a video, and I'm sorry I'm not wearing a PFD. This was in Panama, and our PFDs didn't show up. But this was a big fish. It's a tuna that was 130, something like that. Here I am trying to gaff it at about the 1 hour and a half point where, that's a long fight.
Yeah, I think you turned gray and grew a beard in between there.
Well, you can see I kind of pissed him off when I did that. And this fish ended up kicking my butt for about 3 hours, 3.5 hours. Now, we were landing fish this size in 30 minutes.
So what do you think the difference was?
Well, if you look at the bend in this rod, I mean, this was kind of a broomstick. And the bend of the rod's fairly out near the tip. I since then started fishing with rods that were very powerful, but much more parabolic. And what that does is it brings that leverage point much closer to your body. Let me stop that. So it brings the leverage point much closer to your body. So if you're using an 8.5-foot jig stick and that thing is fast taper, I mean, that fighting point is so far out there. It's so much harder on your body.
Right.
I bring a little bit shorter, that was probably a 7-foot rod. Now I go for 5.5 to 6-foot rods for these big fish. Mm-hmm. It's just bringing all of that much closer to my body. It's much easier on my body. Small reels, tight drags, and I'm landing the fish in, like I said, when we were together, we were landing fish in 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I noticed that what you said, like I came away from that trip and I had in my head that I wanted a 7-foot to 7.6 rod, and that's what Mark had actually built me on some of those blanks. And I thought that because I wanted the extra length to go out and around the bow of the kayak, right? I'm like, oh, I got to go out and around the bow if I'm fighting a fish. You don't have to do that when you're fighting these type of fish. You can they're going to move the kayak, right? So coming back from that, I literally, thought if I had to do over, I wouldn't change necessarily the blank, but I would go with a 6-foot rod just to make it a little bit easier because like the more rod that I had out there, like you said, the more, I'm having to high stick it, if you will, to get any kind of pressure on,
right. And if the boat, if it does want to go under the boat or whatever, just bury the rod tip in the water and against the side of the kayak, and it'll just spin your kayak around.
Right.
But it's much, much easier on your body. That stiff rod, I mean, I was feeling every tail beat. It was just like, I mean, it was just killing me. But again, years later, and we switched to these shorter, much more parabolic, but super powerful rods. But bring that fighting point closer to your body for my really short arms.
That's an inside joke.
It made a huge, huge difference on how quickly you could land the fish and how much more pressure you could.
I had to put that up there because we talked about it for like 30 minutes and then we're like, oh, here's the video with no PFD.
I wasn't going to not go kayak fishing in Panama because my PFD didn't.
You should have stayed and not went kayak fishing.
Yeah,
but you did have a help boat right there with you the whole time, so people don't see that kind of stuff. But still, we're not advocating for not wearing your PFD. But anyway, James called you out on that one.
It had to happen.
So I know we went through this hour very quickly, as I knew it would, because you and I could talk forever about this kind of stuff. If people want more information and want to just bug the crap out of you with question after question, what's the best way that they could find more information just about going offshore in general, or if they want to reach out to you?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty easy to reach out to. I mean, I love to talk about stuff, particularly while we're in lockdown. I got nothing else to do. The Facebook page, of course, the Kayak Fishing Show with Jim Sammons Facebook page is where we spend most of our time. I do a little bit of Instagram stuff, which is the Kayak Fishing Show. And then, of course, our YouTube channel, which has hundreds and hundreds of videos on it, is Kayak Fishing Tales.
So Kayak Fishing Tales, they can message you on Facebook. The Kayak Fishing Show with Jim Sammons on Facebook. If you haven't been over there, it's a lot of great content. And I'll be honest, you're part of the reason that I got into this thing. You know, in the beginning, I definitely was chasing fish in the river and needed a boat, but we started watching the Kayak Fishing Show, which gave me that, you know, inspiration or bug to try to take it, you know, outside of the rivers and small ponds that I live near, and you become more of that adventure angler. And, you know, some of my, you know, first experiences offshore were with you in San Diego. Actually, before we do cut out, I will share, you know, this funny picture that you happened to send me earlier. You probably thought I wouldn't share it, but I'm gonna pull it up because, you know, you got to learn, and this is how you learn. I went out. This is in I think that's a CUDA.
Yeah, that would have been a CUDA.
Yeah, so that's a CUDA. That's me getting. This is just like momentarily before my head hits the sand, I think, on the bottom there. But you'll see, I took all my gear out of the boat, and I made it successfully, by the way, in and out of the breakers that day. But then it was like, all right, I want to go learn more about how to control my boat in this particular swell. So I dropped my gear on the beach and went back out and played and just got wrecked like 3 or 4 times and came back in. But I successfully made it out and in that day before this all happened. So,
well, and I know we planned on talking a lot more about surf and stuff, so maybe we'll do that another time.
Yeah, we could do another one of these and get into actually some of the boat control and technical paddling aspects of getting
Love to.
the breakers.
Thanks for having me on, man. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. We went a little over, but that's all right. I'm going to end the show. Jim, thanks again for coming out. You know, stay safe out there and wash your hands, man. They're dirty. They're filthy. Just keep them washed. All right. See you later.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Yep. All right, guys. Thanks. That is another episode. Sorry we went a little long there, but that's another episode of Tech Talking. Jim and I could go on and on about this stuff, and we're a big advocate for safety as well. So if you have any questions about any of this stuff, feel free to message me, message Jim. Jim's definitely the expert when it comes to offshore and landing big fish. I haven't landed as many as he has. Richard says that he actually has Jim's address, so you could just go like yell at him through the window right now, because I'm sure he won't invite you into his house with all the things that are going on right now. Plus, he has like 15 dogs in there. Camille is sharing the link in the comments to the Kayak Fishing Tales. So if you have any, there's tons of good videos there as well. But again, thank everyone for watching. Please stay positive through all this. We're going to get through this stuff together, and just, you know, do the safety things that you need to do. Wash your hands, do the social distancing. I know it's hard. Everyone wants to go fishing. I want to go fishing. I'm having to sneak around and go to private, and luckily I have that opportunity. But, you know, just try to stay as positive as we can through this. We'll get through this together. And while we're stuck at home, it's a great time to learn how to do some of this stuff and get your boat rigged and ready and plan those trips. Until next time, I'm your host, Jameson. Thanks for watching. And I'm going to switch over. I'm never ready for this part, you know, at the end here where I have to actually click something. But see you guys later.